So with each roundtable, we want to talk to experts in the community, and these are experts that are actually working in the field with people directly. And we want to talk about the rising. What does that look like for each of our guests in terms of moving forward and improving life for everyone in El Paso? So today, we're very honored to be talking about the power of social work. And as a reminder, when we have roundtables, our guests are not endorsing the campaign. They are here in their individual capacity. And so their opinion and participation does not signal or mean that the employer that they have or the organization that they work for is endorsing the campaign at all. We're just very lucky to have them as experts in El Paso. Now we're going to do a round and introduce ourselves. And so if we could start with Myra.
Sure. I'm Myra Garcia. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and board-approved supervisor in the state of Texas. I'm currently a professor at an MSU, and I'm also a trauma therapist at Liberación Therapy and Consultation.
Wonderful. Mimi?
Hello, yes. My name is Talitha Dross. My pronouns are she, her. I currently work as a psychotherapist at Centro San Vicente.
Thank you. Marcus?
My name is Marcus McDuffie. My pronouns are he, him. I started the Social Workers of El Paso. I'm a soldier and I work as a social worker here in the community of El Paso.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm Veronica Carvajal. I'm running for mayor for the city of El Paso. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. And when we thought about this topic, we realized that our country is having to confront a lot of different issues that were prompted, or conversations that were prompted by George Floyd's death at the hands of police. And a lot of different people are calling for defunding and even abolishing the policing as we know it. And oftentimes we hear about social workers either complementing police work or replacing much of policing as we know it right now. So we really wanted to talk about what social work is, because a lot of us might feel comfortable thinking we could do these things, but not really understand what social work means right now and what it should mean within and without the context of defunding the police. We do know that police officers are very expensive and sometimes not the best way to address societal problems like mental health, like people who are homeless, like domestic violence, like child abuse, like sexual assault. And so this is why we thought this conversation was very timely and that we could really hopefully address some of these maybe misunderstandings or reaffirm things that people believe about social work and its power to contribute to positive social change. And so I wanted to start off by recognizing the fact that social workers, like many other essential workers, are often overworked, underpaid, and not even given the tools or resources or the healthcare sometimes to deal with their own secondary trauma, right? As you're gonna hear from our guests, a lot of people who work directly with people in crisis don't always leave that crisis at work. And so that is what I'm talking about when I talk about the secondary trauma that a lot of people, including people that I've worked with as an attorney, take home with them after meeting with someone who's going through the trauma themselves. And so the first question I wanted to ask, and we also will be taking questions from the audience, but the first question that we pose to get the conversation going is, what is the role of social work right now? And any one of our guests is welcome to answer.
So I could go ahead and start. I wanted to wait. I know that in Zoom, you're always kind of like waiting to see if somebody will go. But I think in the context of what's happening in our world right now, there's so many things, right? There's the pandemic, there's the anti-Blackness and racism that we're seeing, also mental health crises. There's so many things that are happening in the world. And with that, I think social workers are usually called upon to address some of these things. But the thing is that social workers do so many things, right? So I'm specifically in mental health and in academia. A social worker might be doing something different at the VA, or doing something different at a homeless shelter or at a food bank. And so I think that that's the power of social work right now, that we're in so many spaces and so many of us have, we go by the same ethics. And so that's where we can really take a part in helping in whatever capacity we can. But I will say that just as any other system, there are flaws in our own system, right? There are social workers that don't know how to address certain things. They aren't aware of racism, anti-Blackness. I mean, I've experienced it here in the city where there are social workers who aren't aware of their proximity to whiteness and the systems that they're a part of and how that also impacts the community. And so while social workers are in a variety of settings, I think that there's a lot of introspection that needs to come from a social worker who's actually able to help in the context of life right now as it stands.
Thank you.
I'd like to add, I think that when we hear the title social work, a lot of people can kind of put that title together. We work socially with people in our community. I think it's important to point out what we had to do to become social workers and get to this point. I think that's the point that a lot of people miss, is the education that comes behind becoming a social worker, which to me is very important to point out. A social worker does have to go through 4 years of an undergrad. We have to get 2 years at a master's degree, that we have to actually apply for the program to get in. After that, we have to finish our master's degree. We have to sit for a licensing exam. That includes lengthy applications, trying to get them to the board and trying to get them to answer you and have it come back. Once you get your license, you can then practice as a licensed master social worker. After you're done and you want to continue on your career to become a licensed clinical social worker, you then have to do 2 years of supervision hours that you do have to pay for. Some colleagues are lucky enough to have some of their organizations pay for these hours of supervision. However, there's some that do not. And after you're done with those 2 hours, you have to do another lengthy application to apply for another license and sit for another exam before you can practice as a licensed clinical social worker.
And to add a little bit to that, when you're thinking about clinical supervision, we're in an under-resourced place.
Yeah.
So there aren't many board-approved supervisors that are accessible to people who are seeking that. And then the ones that are accessible, sometimes the rates are so high that it's financially difficult for social workers to pursue that unless they have some type of financial privilege or assistance elsewhere.
Yeah. So when we talk about the roles of social workers, anybody who's gone to social work school, even at the bachelor's level, there's no less than 14 different roles that we're taught about for social workers. And that's just at one level. So we also practice at the bachelor's level, the master's level, which the three of us practice at. Myra has her independent clinical license. There's people who have PhDs in social work who mainly focus in academia and in research, which is, for me, a critical component of the services that we provide to the community. It becomes a challenge because our field is so broad, and education-wise, we're pretty much generalists. And then after our education, that's where we begin to specialize.
Correct.
For people to understand exactly what we do in the community, because our profession is so broad, which it needs to be, because there's a wide array of social challenges that we are at times uniquely equipped to respond to. So it's difficult to have we could spend a whole hour plus just talking about roles. But I think as far as responding to the current state of our country and the world, I think probably our most important role is planning, is putting people in position to access resource, helping people come up with plans to address some of these issues and concerns that we're facing, whether it's police brutality, whether it's how do we fix a system, if we completely abandon the system, what do we replace it with? All those things that those social workers need to be at the table and involved in those conversations. In the way that our government is set up at the local, state, and federal level, our voices, I don't believe, are really being heard. So that's why I was super excited about this opportunity to speak truth to power.
Mm-hmm. Marcus, you bring up something very important. I mean, as social workers, we're taught about micro, meso, and macro, right? So we really are trained and taught to look at social issues at very different levels, whether it's we're doing one-on-one work, we're doing community work, doing policy research. And I think that provides a very unique lens when it comes to the government at different levels.
Well, and Marcus, I mean, recently, where do you think you would want to be able to speak truth to power about these issues? Is there right now a space where you feel that you could interject and say, actually, when it comes to any given scenario, let's say with domestic violence, right? I know that's an area where many people, including myself, sometimes think, well, maybe the police are the best at responding to those types of calls. What you hear sometimes from victims is like, well, the police actually don't show up, or they actually don't help when they do show up. And so, but there is the risk of lethality and physical violence against an officer. And so I know that there are different cities that send a social worker to a domestic violence call along with police officers. Is that something that El Paso is doing or should think about doing? Or do we need to address DV through different means?
Well, so I think first, I think we need to kind of look at what criminal justice is and what social work is and how they're different. So my first internship at the bachelor's level, I worked for adult probation and parole, and I hated it. I hated it because I had 12 clients. They were all males, and they were all convicted of domestic violence. And at the time, I was 19. And I was working with these guys that were in their mid 30s, mid 40s, and having to explain things to them like, no, your wife did not deserve to get hit. No, you shouldn't have thrown an air conditioner at her. That's not right. No, you shouldn't beat your kids with a broomstick. And it's like, man, I'm 19 and I have to explain this to adults. I also felt trapped because criminal justice by nature is reactive. And that's not my personality. And I don't think that's what social work is. Social work is proactive. So it's addressing the problem before it becomes an issue. And, there were opportunities through, like I would do anger management classes with them to kind of try to correct some behavior. But it was really, if I could simplify, I think criminal justice is paternal in nature. And social work is more maternal, and it's more education and guiding people and trying to help people become the best they can be. And I feel criminal justice at times throws people away for the sake of what we deem as the good people in society. So when we talk about where I want social workers to be, yeah, social workers can be on the front line. Being a social worker and knowing a lot of social workers, I don't know that there's a ton of social workers that are going to volunteer to want to do that, who are mentally or physically equipped to handle those kinds of duties. Where I think a lot of my colleagues are equipped is to be in the prosecutor's office, the district attorney's office, and to be providing assistance there. Because that's where a lot of people are lost. Most cases don't go to trial. There's plea bargains and all that stuff that makes it so that these cases don't go to trial. And if we have social workers in those offices to advocate and to educate and to provide resources for the people who need them, then we would have less strain on different aspects of our system, whether it's CPS, whether it's the jails, whether it's the cops going to houses, 3 times a week, 10 times a month to respond to domestic violence calls, and then nothing being done.
So I'd like to add to that. Before practicing here in El Paso, I practiced in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I was a crisis therapist out there. We had a phone and we were the first ones on scene in any crisis situations. included from suicide to domestic violence to any physical altercations. And my experience at first was like, whoa, this is too much, right? But the more I did it, the more I came to realize that it was kind of just like having an office on the road. We did not take the place of the place of the officers because we needed them. They are essential. And the difference was we were just able to go in first and diffuse the situation and come from kind of a different perspective and still have the officers there on standby if we needed them. And that system seemed to work great out there. I'm not sure how it would work here in El Paso.
I think that when we're exploring these things, it makes me think about how the criminal justice system is punitive, right? And as social workers, that's never our stance in any situation that I can think of as a social worker. Are we supposed to be disciplinarians? And so I could see how potentially having social workers work with police officers or take over in those roles, how that could be helpful in de-escalating.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of taking over a system that's punitive, that doesn't align with our ethics.
Correct.
And I know that personally doesn't align with why I do social work, right? And when you think about what drives these criminal justice systems of not just punitive, but also the white supremacy, the oppression, the injustices, the inequities, those are things that just they're contrary to what we do as social workers. We can educate all we want, but it's not going to change the reality of what these systems are. I remember when I was in New York, I was implementing a program for gun violence. I was in East Harlem, and the goal was to set up a clinical team to respond to shootings in the hotspots that we were in. And part of my role was to set up partnerships with the NYPD, and that was near impossible. So to even get the buy-in, right, from these systems, to have us be a part of these systems, even if we were just there to de-escalate, that these systems are so rigid. How will we be brought on, and do we actually have a say in how to mold those systems, or are we forced to just kind of acclimate and assimilate to the existing system?
And I think there's a unique opportunity. I think having played sports my whole life and been in the military for the past 12 years, there's a certain idea of fraternity, of brotherhood, of sisterhood, and these kind of organizations. And it prevents people from speaking out against bad actors. It's also a closed system. So when you're in this group and it's just you guys in this group, it's harder to have anybody else's voices heard. I work at a psychiatric hospital and I work in the admissions department. So I have a lot of contact with the CIT teams here in El Paso. The officers that I meet that work with the CIT teams are very much different than the officers I meet that aren't working with the CIT teams. And these aren't bad officers. It's just what they've been exposed to, seeing the way that people work with people as if they're people instead of perpetrators or threats changes the way that they interact with people on a day-to-day basis. So I think adding more people into the system instead of having this kind of closed system where everybody is a police officer, everybody has this one mentality, and having different opinions, having somebody riding your car next to you that has a different approach broadens your approach. And I haven't seen it work the other way where the therapists are getting out and they're like, screw these people or lock them up and throw them away. It's the mental health professionals are rubbing off on the officers, and I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think we need more of that. I think they need to be integrated, yes, with the police officers, but in every level, whether it's at the county jails, at the prosecutor's office, at the public defender's office, they need to be integrated into every level.
How do you propose doing that?
By budgeting, by the city council adding social work positions and not relying on interns who are motivated but inexperienced and working on a part-time basis, and also overwhelmed because they're also full-time students, and some of them are also working full-time jobs at the same time. So not necessarily defunding the police, but there's money in the budget. I looked at the county of El Paso's budget a few weeks ago for last fiscal year. And I think there was something like 10 to 15 paid social work positions. And I think the majority of them were grant funded. So why isn't the city investing in a much needed resource? We can say that wow, look at how big the police budget is. And that's not really in any context, because we're not saying, look how small the budget is for social workers, right? If we're saying that there's a need, we don't need to say, let's not have any police, or let's slash the police budget in half. We could quadruple, or increase the budget for social workers tenfold, and that wouldn't really put a dent into the police budget and the impact that it would have across our society. 2 years from now, I think people would say, let's increase it by 10 again, because that's a resource that I think is needed, but it comes down to money. This is my profession. Am I passionate about it? Yes, but I also got kids, and you guys can see I like shoes. So I'm not trying to be out here working for free.
Yeah.
The money needs to be there. The same way that we say officers put their lives on their line, they do a dangerous job, they do something that's important to our community. We want to make sure that they can, provide for their family. We need to look at social workers in the same light.
That makes me think of also incentives to keep social workers in a region, right? Because we are an under-resourced and an underserved area. And so if we are able to allocate more funds for these positions that are working within the county or the city, but also what's going to keep qualified social workers in the city, right? And not have to leave somewhere else where they're getting paid higher salaries and the cost of living is complementing their salaries. I think that's a big issue here too. Thinking about what local programs can be set up for like loan forgiveness, even if it's small amounts, as if you commit to staying here for a certain amount of time. I think we lose out on a lot of social workers who know the border very well and who could help tackle these issues if they stayed. I was one of the ones that left and then came back. And so I'm sure there are more social workers that do that and could be an asset to the city.
And yes, and can you all tell us, I think we talked about this before we went live, where you're from and how you ended up in El Paso, and also what has kept you here?
So I was born and raised in New York. I lived in Florida for a few years. I moved over here because of my spouse. He was in the military, an ex-spouse was in the military. I kind of was always that person that, when am I going to leave El Paso? When am I going to leave El Paso? But then I kind of started falling in love with the community, the people, the way everybody's so wholesome and caring and loving. I mean, we saw that when they got together with the shooting in Walmart, how the whole community came together. I've never seen that type of love within a community before. And I just grew love for the city. That's why I decided to stay. However, going back to our profession and being underpaid, it's becoming difficult for me to say this is going to be my forever home, because I do need to support my family as well. And I do like to buy shoes also.
Thank you.
Marcus, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I'm from Philadelphia. I've been here for about 11 years. I came out here with the military. And I literally stayed because, and I tell people this all the time, I didn't know what I was going to be doing with my life. And it was cheaper for me to figure it out here in El Paso than back in Philly. Because what I was paying to rent a 2-bedroom apartment is what I would be paying to rent a room in Philly. So it just made sense. And El Paso isn't a bad place to be when you're single. So that's why I ended up staying. But like once I had my kids and everything, I like the environment. I would like to raise my kids somewhere that's more diverse, somewhere where people are more aware of race and culture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you know, for now, this is where we're at. But also, like, there's a bunch of different factors where if I don't necessarily feel as though El Paso is competing for my services, where like we want to keep the most qualified people in any given profession there in El Paso. Um, so yeah, if I got a better option in Dallas or Austin or Houston or back on the East Coast, then yeah, I would take it. Even though I love the city, because I've never felt as though El Paso was competing for my professional services.
Thank you for that. Well, I mean, I know this is a really important topic for me. It has been throughout my adulthood, but both Myra and Marcus, you brought up the issue of race and anti-racism and what that means for El Paso, and what it means for transplants to El Paso. Do you either of you feel comfortable talking about how you would see? And I'll go back to what the police department in El Paso and throughout the country tends to turn to, which is the academies. When we get new recruits, we can talk about maybe implicit bias. Maybe we'll pepper that throughout someone's 25 to 30-year career, and that's about it. Sometimes we'll look at data and we'll maybe see some, bad behavior. Maybe we'll do something about it. What does it mean to be anti-racist in a community that's majority minority, and that has a long history of not being comfortable talking about systemic racism? And we saw with the shooting that there was, arguably, I guess rightly so, there was a lot of blame placed on an invader, right? Racism came to El Paso. Racism is not in El Paso. I don't agree with that, but I wanted to hear your perspectives about what it is that would make all of our systems in El Paso face up to this dialogue that really hasn't been had.
Well, I can say for me, especially when I first came to El Paso, it was a weird combination, because I would get people that would look at me weird if I was out on a date with a Mexican girl, but I would also get people that were friendly, and I'm from a place where, why are you smiling at me? Like if I was on the subway in Chile and somebody was smiling at me, I would think that they probably wanted to fight me or rob me. So it was just weird to meet people that were just like straight friendly. And then there were people that, had racist thoughts when they would see me, but it just never really bothered me. Trying to engage the community in anti-racism, I think it's a challenge, because you say it's a majority minority, but the majority of the people in El Paso haven't really left El Paso. So the city is unique, I think, in that you look at the city council and it looks like the people of the city. For the most part, the politicians in El Paso look like the people of El Paso. So there's a lot of representation when you look at the police force. For the most part, it looks like the city of El Paso. So the people who are in power look like the people of the city, and I think that goes a long way, and for people feeling comfortable. So for a lot of people, they've never had to deal with racism. They've never had to deal with any kind of bias at home. They'll see things on TV, they'll hear a Donald Trump speech, and they're like, man, that's messed up. But that's not, in my experience, what it's like living on a daily basis here in El Paso. I haven't really had too many instances of just straight up racism. There's some ignorance, which I would expect in any community where people who look like me make up, 3% of the population. That to me is expected, because I believe that for the vast majority of racism in this country is due to ignorance. And the only way to overcome ignorance is through exposure. So those are, things that I look forward to. I want to meet people that are like, man, they're like the 5th Black person I've ever met, and I'm 30. It's like, wow, that's, That's crazy. But let's have, those conversations. They don't make me uncomfortable. So yeah, I don't think that El Paso is a racist city, but it's hard to be anti-racist when you don't have a passion for what you're fighting against because you haven't really had to deal with it. It's not something that you're super aware of. And if I'm being honest, that's kind of the world that I want my kids to grow up in. Unfortunately, I know that that's not the reality, so I have to expose them to things that make them uncomfortable, things that make them question. If I walked into the hallway right now and I said, say it loud, my kids would scream, I'm Black and I'm proud. But those are things that, like, I've been teaching them since they were younger, so that when they get, to middle school or to high school and someone calls them the N-word, it's not, they kind of know how to respond and they have pride in their heritage.
I'd like to share a little bit and add to what you were saying, because I think that we do live in a bubble here. I mean, I spent most of my life here and then I moved away, and I remember experiencing being different, but not knowing that I was different. And I am a fair-skinned Chicana. So, I mean, I'm not like, to me, I couldn't label it as racism because I'd never been, or I thought I had never been exposed to it here. And then now that I've learned a little bit more about systemic racism, institutional racism, and what that looks like, oh, it's definitely present in the city. It's present in so many ways. There may be brown folks and Latinos, Chicanos, people of color that are all around the city, but there's so much internalized stuff within our communities. And I think that that impacts the way that the city is run, right? So let's say our city council is predominantly brown or native El Pasoans, Chicanos, Latinos, whatever it may be. What I want to know is, what is your proximity to whiteness and how does that impact your decision making? And if you are somebody who is not a Black, Indigenous, or person of color that's making decisions in the city, whether it be on city council, whether it be at nonprofits, whether it be at any institution with power, how are you exploring that? How are you exploring your whiteness? And how is that impacting the things that you're doing for our communities? And I find that a lot in our city, not just in like local government, but also in organizations, that there's not that exploration. And that just perpetuates the systemic issues. And as long as that happens, we continue to live in a bubble, and that's a problem. It's nice, right, that we're the majority, but that doesn't exclude us from racism and the implicit ways that it shows up. And as somebody who has like racist family members, right? Like I've seen it, I've heard it, like, oh, estás más bonita because you're lighter, or like your cousin está negrita. Like those are racist things to say. And so how do we combat those things within our families, our communities, our laws, our policies, our programs, because it does show up everywhere. It's just a matter of where are we in terms of our levels of survival, if we have the energy to be present and to engage in that, or if we maybe choose to battle that in a different way, and it's different for everybody in our community.
Well, I'm 43. I'm probably older than all of you. And I grew up in El Paso and commuting from Juarez to El Paso. I learned at a very young age, at 6, that I could not tell an ally based on their skin, right? So I didn't know if most of them were men, if the customs officer who was white, Black, Asian, or brown was going to be nice to my mom, or too nice, like too creepy nice, or was going to be rude and demeaning. Because my mom was a US citizen, she never had a problem defending herself and speaking out. But we do live in a community where we do have people who are undocumented. And going back to my own childhood, I remember going trick-or-treating in some of the whiter or upper class neighborhoods and speaking Spanish with my cousins and being told we're going to call them migra by other kids. I did lose my Spanish because my bilingual program was meant to make me a monolingual English speaker. That was the goal in the 80s. there were zero role models for us to follow. We had people like Alicia Chacon, who became the first city rep to be, a Chicana in the 80s, and then the first county judge soon after that. But we've never had a Latina mayor. We've had 4 Latino mayors in a history of over 150 years. The Ku Klux Klan ran our school boards. We did have Jim Crow. We did have segregated barrios for Mexicans and for Blacks. And, people think, well, that's history, right? Now we're okay. When you look at city policies, like in 2006, when the city was going to develop downtown, they paid $100,000 for a study that basically said the old is it was an older man, a viejito, wearing a cowboy hat, and they described him as old, gritty, Spanish-speaking, and dirty. And they had what the future was supposed to look like, which was Matthew McConaughey and Penelope Cruz, and they were, flashy, bilingual, middle class, etc. We paid for a study like that. We never got an apology. We never got our money back. And then you think, well, that's only a study. Well, then you look at what's happened in Segundo Barrio, the Chamizal, Lincoln Park, which is almost completely gone, or Lincoln Center, is something that we fought for a lot. And then Duranguito. And you think, well, it's about progress. It's about, making El Paso more like Austin and Dallas and Houston. But when you think about the fact that those brown and primarily old brown lives are not given the same value, that is racist, right? There are a lot of things going on in the city government that I think are so embedded that we reduce racism to someone called me something negative instead of really trying to dismantle all of this. And I think all of our systems need to be thinking about what it really means to be anti-racist, which is unpackaging that. I'm a legal aid attorney, and so we like to look at data, and different groups, for instance, will pull up funding, right? So you can see clearly on a map what communities are getting the best schools, what communities are getting shut down, what kids are having to face crowded spaces next to pollution. And in El Paso, it's the Chamizal right now. That neighborhood is under attack by so many different forces. So I do want to ask people, including social workers, to really think about those spaces, because sometimes I know that for us at TRLA, we drown in our work, and sometimes it's really hard to come up for air and to look at these bigger patterns, right? But you all, because you're in the field, you see that. You see the people. And again, once we take a look back and we start looking sometimes at the data, you're like, oh my gosh, even issues like we're seeing with COVID, predisposition, right, to falling ill. Why is that? Where does that person live? What's next to them? All kinds of other issues. What's their access to healthcare?
And why the city council won't release those figures so that we can have the data so that we can respond.
Absolutely. That kind of transparency is really important, so that we can, send the help to where it's most needed. Well, I wanted to see if y'all were comfortable in telling us what a day in your life at work is like. You can pick any day. Maybe, I don't know if you want to pick a more traumatic day, but what is it like where you work now, or where you've worked in the past, that you'd like to share, to give us sort of a view into the things that you see?
Mimi, do you want to start? I know that we've kind of taken some of your time.
I didn't want to talk over anyone. Well, currently right now, because of the pandemic, I am working from home. So I am doing telehealth from home as of now. However, I do notice that my client load has increased. I'm seeing a lot of more anxiety, a lot of phobias, a lot of, am I going to die? What's going to happen? I can't feed my family. I lost my job. They're going to stop unemployment. So I see our community stressed, overwhelmed, concerned, scared. I see my level of depression and anxiety patients increasing. Suicidal ideations have increased just because, I'm not man enough to take care of my family. What am I going to do now? my days have been really difficult because sometimes you don't have you want to help as a social worker the best way you can. Okay, let me give them a referral to the case manager for food and for maybe housing and maybe try to give them all these resources. But we're really limited right now with the things, the resources that we have within our community.
What is your population? Is it based on income? Is it based on?
Yes, it's income based. I work for my clinic is a nonprofit organization, so we see a lot of migrants in our clinic and lower income populations. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. Who would like to go next?
MJ?
Sure. So for me, the day varies a lot because I'm at NMSU, and then I see clients privately. So I could think it depends what day of the week, but for the most part at NMSU, what we're really working on is enhancing our curriculum and making sure that we're focusing on border populations. And we've done a lot of anti-oppressive and anti-racism work in our curriculum over the last few years, and we're revamping that even more now. So that's what that looks like. And then also prepping for the semester that will be all online because of COVID. And how do we meet student needs? And how do we take into consideration what students are experiencing at home? And so this is like a different part of social work too, right? That even though I'm a professor and a coordinator, we still have to think about linking resources for students who are in need, taking into consideration like COVID, employment, and how that impacts students in attending their courses that are online or via Zoom now, and troubleshooting and showing empathy in that sense. In terms of therapy, I'm a trauma therapist. So most of my clients or the people that I work with have experienced some type of trauma. And what I'm finding now is that those trauma symptoms are even more activated than they usually are because of the things that are happening in people's lives in regards to the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the police brutality that really impacts people's mental health, especially if people have already experienced their own form of oppression or any other type of trauma. So I'm finding that I'm having to support clients a little bit more around that.
I can say for me professionally, this has been a very challenging year. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm still a soldier in the Army Reserves. I've had 2 soldiers commit suicide this year. So reaching out to the soldiers in my company, trying to make sure that people are, healthy, taking care of my own mental health and, and my family, and then going to work. I think since February, I've been averaging about 60 hours a week at my job. And I will say the pandemic has been challenging. A lot of people are home. The lack of structure for someone with an anxiety disorder, somebody with depression, with racing thoughts, with compulsive behaviors, and not having anything to do has made a lot of that worse. I think on the plus side is that people have so much time that they can actually go and get treatment now. So somebody's going to go and be in inpatient therapy for 7 to 10 days. It's not so much, oh, well, I have to work or I have school, because they're not going to work, they're not going to school. So they can actually take the time now to focus on their mental health. And the mental health community has responded by adapting to what we're currently facing. So a lot of providers are providing telehealth. A lot of people are still providing in-person treatment. So the services are still there, which, is I'm grateful for. And I think it's a beautiful thing. But yeah, no, it's hard. It's as hard as we've always been saying it is to be a social worker. Listen to us when we tell you guys, it's not easy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But in the spirit of social work, we're all very resilient and we've adapted very well. And I think that we're learning a little bit more about what resources we need to be able to function and really provide for the community during these times, and even after, whatever the after looks like.
Yeah, and I mean, also, let's not take that for granted. The same way, certain terms where I think have become toxic, like strong black woman, where it's like, oh, like I have to do this because this is what's expected of me. Just because we're social workers doesn't mean that we can't get in. The reality is that a lot of our peers will burn out within the first few years of being in this profession. Which, when you listen to my colleagues talk about the amount of education we've had to go through to get to this point, imagine going to school for 6 years and then burning out in that profession in 3.
Yeah.
And those student loans don't go away, right? No. So yeah, like we're social workers, but we're still human beings. So part of the betterment for the betterment of society is to keep us healthy. I'm a medic in the Army, and if somebody gets shot, they say protect Doc, because Doc's the only one that can patch us all up. So we can't let Doc get shot, right? So we have the social workers out here, and we're doing all of those 15 plus different roles, and we're going to the communities that other people don't want to go to, and we're working with the clients that people don't want to work to. We're listening to the stories that people don't want to hear. Like, we have to stay healthy. We have to be able to take time off of work. There needs to be more people employed in our field. We need to be paid better so that we can afford to take time off of work. We need to be able to take time off of work and not say, if I take a week off of work, that just means that when I come back, there'll be the next week that I'm there's going to be 2 weeks worth of work that I need to do because nobody can cover for me. Like, those are all things that affect our ability to provide services for our community. And not just do it for this month or this year, but for a lifetime. So yeah, for the most part, we're resilient, but we can't take that for granted.
Yeah, so just like everyone else, we have our coping skills and things that we do to make ourselves feel better. And because of the pandemic, a lot of those coping skills have been taken away, like go for a massage, go get your nails done, get a pedicure. Can you do that without worrying? So some of the worries that our clients have, we have those same worries and concerns when it comes to our own well-being.
Yeah, and our family members are getting COVID and dying. Like, we're dealing with the same things that our patients are dealing with. And, when those things happen, it's even more stressful for us, because how can we take care of ourselves when we have all these other people we need to take care of? We have we have our clients we need to take care of, and our family we need to take care of, and we would feel guilty if we tried to take a break. I'm off for the next 2 weeks, and if you guys follow me on Facebook, you're gonna see me doing a whole bunch of stuff I love, and I'm not gonna feel guilty about it. But a lot of my peers don't have that same kind of attitude.
Yeah, it also makes me think about organizations and the people that we work for, right? And how they are demanding certain things from us when, we had to cope in our own way. We're also going through all of this with everybody else. And so systemically, right? If supervisors are supporting their employees, and if they're not able to, or productivity, or you need to meet numbers because of funding and grants, and how that also contributes to burnout, not just now, but all the time, which I know happens a lot with our organizations here, because there's so much need, but then there's also a demand to meet numbers. But we're human, we need vacations, we need more than just 2-week vacations a year, we need adequate pay, we need good benefits. I worked at an organization where the benefits were terrible. I could not afford to get sick. And this was me, like, already with my advanced clinical license, and I wasn't offered a retirement plan. I had to search these things for myself, and it's tough. And so social workers who go through so much schooling and go through so much education shouldn't have to worry so much about these things, that if we need to take all of this time off, or if we need just a day for ourselves, that we shouldn't worry about productivity or the numbers that are being kind of asked to be met for funding.
Just like they say, we're kind of like the invisible frontline workers, right? Because we are much frontline, however, we're invisible because we're doing our work in the back.
Well, we, as you all know, I work at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, and so we're community lawyers, and we see a lot of the same people that you all have seen. We have a veterans legal clinic. We have a homeless legal clinic. A lot of my clients are always vacillating between homelessness and being housed. And our family team sees primarily, well, it takes on, prioritizes domestic violence cases, because many DV victims cannot afford a lawyer to help them pay for custody battles or divorces, or even, to follow through with the restraining order. And we have a social worker, Monica Diaz, who's fabulous. But I've learned a lot about your profession through the work that she does, because so many of us as attorneys and paralegals and even secretaries want to do the work of social work because that's just what we do at Legal Aid. We see the whole person, not just this one legal issue. And it has been incredible for our program throughout the state to have been able to access and to hire and retain social workers, because we see the value that they bring, right? When we do have a client who needs a safety plan, we send them to a social worker. They need help with their crime victims compensation application, they go to Monica. A client who says, I am thinking about committing suicide, we're able to talk to them and get some more information, but then ultimately we know that we can rely on her to really follow through and then let us know what we can do. So I think that a lot of nonprofits who do poverty work, who are helping people who are really vulnerable, need to really think about hiring, supervising, retaining, compensating social workers, because y'all carry so much of the load that lets us do the work that we need to do, right, in the courts. And I know that Monica also, as Marcus was talking about earlier, she does go to court, but those kinds of cases are not what you're talking about, right? These are family law cases where she's there to be a witness. What you're talking about is actually, we could even go farther and have people there on the ready to deal with potential inmates or inmates and talk about what is going on, so the work can be transformative instead of just punitive. And we're not all seeing a revolving door, because I know I've had some very challenging clients, and then I'll refer them to someone else. They're like, they've already been here. We already tried. And then I'm like, I call someone else and it's like, okay, so we are seeing in many ways an overlap of the same people, and we're all maybe not pulling all our resources together to figure out how do we get them to where they need to be, so that, they can actually transform and move on.
And then the responsibility often falls onto nonprofits in the community, and they just don't have the personnel or the resources to be as aggressive and proactive as they would like. Whereas when we're talking about a city with, what, $250 million, $500 million budget, like, let's find the funds so that we can serve the people of our community and not rely on grants or donations to provide essential services. And
Yeah.
sorry to cut you off.
That was perfect. No, I 100% agree. I think especially right now, I know many of us have not had a break, right? So when crisis hits, a lot of us, community lawyers, immigration lawyers, social workers, we can't take a break, right? This did not really transform our lives. We saw our cases increase because the need of our already very vulnerable population just got worse, and everyone's in crisis mode. And so I 100% appreciate your time and appreciate what you're doing, because we feel you, we understand what this pandemic has meant. And Marcus, I hope you enjoy your vacation. It's awesome.
It's not a vacation. Yeah, I'm on military leave, but it's a lot less hours than with my civilian job. So yeah, I'm gonna make the most out of it.
Absolutely. No, you shouldn't. I think that we need to talk a lot more about self-love and self-care for the essential workers. And right now that includes a lot of people that we really haven't talked about. And so we're gonna have to start wrapping up, since we're running up close to the hour. Is there anything else that y'all would like to let people know about the value of your work, the promise of your work, the power of your work, and what could be done to help you do the thing that you really want to do, and not worry about, not burn out?
Well, not to focus so much on capitalism, but money, more funding and money would be nice for people in our profession. And I think I just, I love this profession so much. I mean, I have a bachelor's in social work, a master's in social work, and I'm pursuing a PhD in social work. And it really is my passion. And the reason behind that is because I can think about people's needs, also my own needs, my family needs, my community needs, my partner's needs, and be strategic and intentional with how I approach those things and how I support people. And I think that because we are helpers, sometimes it's nice to have others like be the helper for us and advocate for us, and to give us the resources we need so we can continue to do this work in a healthy and productive and in a loving way, and not in a tired and sick way or burnt out way.
We don't all work for CPS. I think that's the biggest misconception about our profession, is that we're the ones that work for CPS that show up to take away your kids. That's not what we do.
And I know I brought up in our groups that we don't have a union for social workers. And I've often wondered why. Why don't we have a union? There's so many other professions that have a union that advocate for their profession. I would like to see something like a social work union come about that would protect our salary and wages and advocate for us as a profession. I mean, we have our NASW, but that's kind of like the people that tell us what we need to do, the rules that we need to follow as far as our profession, but not anyone that really advocates for our needs as social workers and our wages and what we deserve for what we do.
I have to say, I work at a unionized law firm, and it makes a very big difference to be able to have negotiations with management. And I mean, so many different ways. And let me tell you, the police have a union.
Yeah, they do.
Powerful.
They do.
And they take care of their own, sometimes to the detriment of the public, but they do. And I think I 100% agree that we need more union jobs in El Paso, but especially in professions like this with essential workers, because like we said before, none of you have had a break. Right now, you have to respond to the needs of the community, and so this is why I think it's an excellent idea to protect your work, your job, your rights as employees, right? As workers. At the end of the day, you are social workers.
Absolutely.
And that protection. And I think with healthcare, my goodness, I hope that you all have access to good mental health care so that you can take care of your own mental health, things that come up because of the work that you do, which is so important.
We spend so much time advocating for others that we often forget to advocate for ourselves.
Which, that's, I think that's what the people who employ us count on. I think there's a reason why, even though males are disproportionately represented in our profession at the administrative level, because even when we get into this field where we've been conditioned to seek those higher levels, and even in social work, males will get paid more with the same level of education. You won't catch me working with a master's degree for $30,000 a year, and I know some colleagues who are. And I don't, we've had this conversation before about unions. I think part of it is on us to say, I am not doing that job with my level of training for that amount of money. And if I have to move somewhere else to get what I'm worth, then I'm going to move. And I think once people start saying, I demand more on, at first on an individual level, then I think that's when we'll start to get more. I think when we start going out of our way to say, hey, you know what, this person seems cool and they're running for mayor, we need to have a sit down with her, because we need to put a bug in her ear. And anybody who wants my vote needs to be able to tell me what they're going to do from their position for social workers and how they're going to involve social workers and making our community better and what that's going to look like, then I think that's when things will start to change for our profession and for our colleagues. Outside of that, if we just sit back and we say, you know, we'll take what's given, or I didn't get into the profession for the money, even though those student loan bills are still coming every month, then I think that, you know, we have it backwards, because our time, our knowledge, our experience, our dedication, and our passion is valuable. And we deserve to be compensated. We deserve to get that time off so that we can still put in that time, dedication, and apply our passion to our field. Like, those things need to happen, and we have to advocate for that. And we have to not feel guilty about it when we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with everything that y'all have said. You know, we need to take care of you because you take care of so many other people, and the work that you do is life-saving, it's life-changing, and that's how we change the culture of our community. You know, and that's sometimes one of the best ways to change our systemic issues is by addressing these things. So I want to thank every single one of you. We just have had the best speakers. We are always amazed at the people that approach us, that we approach, and who may not be directing. They're not the directors. They are the field workers who are working with people day in and day out and have a true passion for doing what you're doing. I too was asked to take a vow of poverty when I started working as a legal aid attorney. Thank goodness for our union, and thank goodness for the fact that we have offices in other cities where we had to equalize salaries. And that has been transformative, and we have retained our talent. We have grown. It's been the best thing ever to actually increase raises, actually attracted more money to our programs. Wow. And so this is a call to a lot of people, nonprofits and others, that, including the city, which is very top heavy, but doesn't take care of its own field employees who are really running things, right? There's the people who rule and the people who run, and we don't take care of the people who run. And I consider you all to be the people who help us function better. And I am very grateful for all the work that you've done, and the fact that, or especially our transplants, that you've made El Paso your home. I so much appreciate you, and Myra, that you haven't left. Thank you. I hope that you all do make El Paso your forever home. And if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and end the session today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.